So you know how it is. You're out and about and you bump into a friend, but they're a non-knitting friend and they admire what you're wearing. It's your hand-spun, hand-knit, jumper, cardigan, whatever. And then they say those words, "I love that. Would you make me one? I'll pay you." Oh, really? So in this video, we're going to be exploring what do you do in that situation? Plus, what should you be charging if you actually want to sell your work? If you're new here, my name is Becca and I make videos about crafting and living a slower lifestyle in the wonderful West Wales. So I'm going to carry on with my walk, then we'll go back to my little fibre art space and carry on this discussion. So I'm in my local woods and you can see that we've got these very pretty rhododendrons, which are of course garden escapees. Unfortunately, they are a bit of a weed in woodland because they suppress all the light and you don't get an understory. So generally, people try and take them out of woods. You can get a natural dye from them, and maybe that's something we will do when they're not in flower and looking so pretty. So I'm filming this in June and the spring wildflowers are just coming to the end, and you can see we're sort of at the end of the foxgloves. And June is often known as the Hungry Gap. And I have to go and check my bees either today or tomorrow. Maybe not today because there's the triathlon on, which means there's a load of road closures, so it'll be a right fiddle to go and get there. But I digress. So these foxgloves are just about the last of the flowers until we sort of get into July. So it's all looking very green, but the blossom and flowers of a few weeks ago have really just about faded. And then, of course, we will see how much rain we get this summer. We had so much rain in the autumn and winter, but we've not had that much rain this sort of late spring. So there you go, that's just where we've walked from. Anyway, I'm going to carry on with my walk and I will see you back at the house very shortly. So back in the house in my little fibre arts cubby hole, and brushed my hair, put a different shirt on and put some lipstick on so I kind of look slightly less like a hedge monkey, although obviously that is the kind of look I have quite a lot of the time really, because you know I live in a country area and don't go to an office, so I kind of walk the dog a lot, and so you quite often see me kind of looking a bit sort of, I don't know, like I've been pulled through a hedge backwards. Anyway, I digress. So, what are we talking about today? The dog has just come down to join me, which you, of course, won't be able to see, but she's down here. So, you're going to be a good girl? Hopefully, she's not going to be too noisy. Okay, so, yes, that dreaded question, will you make me one? I think there's a couple of answers. If it's a really close friend, then of course you just make them one, and you know it's a gift and you don't mind doing it. But what if it's just an acquaintance, or you know, kind of a friend of a friend, and you're like, well, are you actually going to pay me what it really costs to make? Because there's the cost of the material is one thing, but actually your time, and only you can answer that. And I think it really depends whether you look at your fibre arts as just a pleasant hobby, and yes, you're quite happy to do things, spin or knit or whatever, for just the cost of the materials, or are you actually looking to have a cottage industry or a small business? And I think that's where the division is. If it's just a hobby and you're happy to do it, then either gift it or say, sure, just pay me for the materials. I mean, I think some people, if you were knitting with 100% wool or a wool silk blend and it was already spun yarn that you bought in the yarn shop, I think people would be slightly surprised as to how much yarn costs. And, you know, obviously there are going to be people in the world who, yeah, you know, money's not really that important. It's not an object of kind of, no, I can't buy it because it's too expensive. But for other people, they're going to be like, actually, I'll just go to the local charity shop because it's a little bit too much more than I can afford. And you're not going to know unless you ask. And never assume, because people will surprise you. I'm going to digress slightly. So, as you probably know, Andrew, my partner, and I used to run a farmer's market stall, and we charged quite a lot of money for our stuff. We made the most expensive sausages on the entire market, and we sold out every week. But they were fantastic sausages, I have to tell you. They were amazing. And our pigs were kept in a woodland, so they were free ranging and they were foraging and they were rare breed pigs, and we were doing everything by hand. Therefore, obviously, there's a lot of cost involved in that. We also were not using fillers, so they were sort of charcuterie style sausages, and we made smoked sausages. So they weren't your average British banger, which is full of rusk. And I mean, in those days, I'm going back, gosh, nearly 10 years, it was really unusual to be gluten free, and everything we did was gluten free. So, we kind of very very consciously made the decision that the market share we were going to go for was high end. And yeah, did we sometimes discount for our friends and family? Yeah, of course we did. And there was a girl that I stood next to, girl at all, she's about the same age as me. Anyway, there's a lady that I stood next to for nearly 10 years doing the farmer's market, and she was a smallholder and a medical herbalist, and we just used to do swaps. She used to make soaps and creams and various things, and obviously we made sausages and bacon and game, and we'd make game, or we dressed game and wild food, and so we just used to do swapsies, and that worked out perfectly well for us. And we used to go and do our shopping around the farmers market, so that we'd get discount and we'd give other traders discounts. So obviously there's your target market and there's your target price, but as long as it's high enough, you've always got a little bit of room to go down. If there's maybe somebody or for some reason you kind of think, actually, I'd like to charge this person maybe not quite so much. So I realise sausages and wool are slightly different, but the analogy is the same. And that if you are going to set out to make your living from your craft and your fibre arts, then you really, really have to sit down and ask yourself a couple of hard questions. And one of them is, who is my customer? It's not the person that buys the cheapest yarn, acrylic yarn. That's not your customer. And so you must never think, gosh, I'm charging a lot of money for what I'm doing. What you're doing is very valuable. You're putting your time and love and energy into a fantastic natural resource, so that actually charging properly for it is really, really important. So obviously I've been self-employed for, long time. Can't actually think. But anyway, and one of the things you have to think about is what you're going to charge for your products, because if it is your business and your living, it's very different from a hobby, as I have said. So how do you work out your pricing? There is a very quick back of the envelope kind of on a napkin in a restaurant kind of way, and it's quite a good benchmark. So that benchmark is 4.5 times your material cost. And generally, that is going to be a pretty good starting point, and it's only a starting point for your product, whatever it is, whether it's sausages or a yarn cake. Now, the thing about yarn and knitting and various things is it's very time dependent. You are effectively trading your time for money, because you're putting in an awful lot of time to get to a finished product. So what you need to do is decide how much you're going to pay yourself. Because if you're quite happy to work for 50 pence, or what's that, 75 cents an hour, yeah, go for it. That's up to you. But really, if you've got bills to pay, you probably don't want to be doing that. So you have to decide what is your rate of pay that you're going to pay yourself. Then you work out all your materials costs, and I mean absolutely all of them, then you work out how long it takes you to make, how much you're going to pay yourself for making that item, and that's going to have a figure. So say your materials costs are £1 and it's going to cost you £3 to make, so that's £4 already. So you then are going to have things like taxes and insurance and blah, 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 blah. And so the list goes on. So again, you have to allocate a certain percentage of your cost that's going to kind of come to that point. Now, back in the day when I used to have to sit down and price menus, which is a really long time ago, we had a formula. So I would suggest that you need to create yourself a formula, and that's going to be your materials costs, how much, I don't know, 100 grams of wool takes you to spin. And I think it's really noticeable, or I've noticed, that a lot of production spinners sell singles. And I think that that's a very sensible thing to do. If you are going to sell your hand spun, I think singles can be quite a good way to go. Obviously, it's not going to be suitable for everything, but a lot of handspun wool is sold into the weaving market. And so weavers are really delighted to have singles because that works really well for their craft. So again, that goes back to who is your market. So if your market is not going to be weavers and you're going to do a applied yarn, then obviously that's going to have another cost because it's going to take you that much more. Having a formula is a really, really useful thing to have because it's going to speed up your costing. Once you've sort of done one costing of to how long it actually takes you to do things, so that you know, okay, so 100 grams of yarn at Aran weight takes me X amount of time to spin, or, you know, sort of 100 grams of knitting at, you know, kind of double weight or Aran weight takes me this amount of time, then you can start to work backwards and actually allocate enough money to that item so that you're actually paying yourself enough money, and then work out your formula. So our formula when we were pricing sausages, you know, as you do, was that our materials cost, so actually the kind of what it costs us to produce a kilo of pork, and for us obviously we weren't buying it, we were actually producing it, so that was another long amount of calculation as well, but anyway, we won't go there. And yeah, so whatever your base cost is represents 35%, and then you put 65% on top. So divide 35, divide your amount of money, I don't know, £2.50 a kilo, it wasn't £2.50 a kilo, but whatever it is, divided by 35 times by 100, and that gives you your cost. Then taxes on top of that. So if you're in the UK, obviously VAT is going to be something you need to consider. It's not on everything, and you do have to look and see what it's on, because it just isn't on everything, and it's kind of depends where you're going to sell as well. And I know if you're in the States, there's things like sales tax, and it's different throughout the States. Then you're going to have to put on your cost of sales. Now, when I talk about cost of sales, that is things like your transaction fees. So if you are taking credit cards, you'll have a transaction fee. If you are standing at a stall at a market or a fair, obviously that's got a cost. If you are driving there, that's got a cost. So these are all things that you need to put on top. Once you've got your basic, you know, if I'm just standing in my house and somebody walks up to me and gives me cash price, then on top you are going to have transport and, I don't know, taxes and insurance and all those things that actually go into making up a business. So it starts to get a little bit daunting, and you go back to go, why am I doing this? but I think if you're absolutely passionate about having a creative business, then certainly hand making things is a way that you can go. But sitting down and spinning and knitting for someone is going to be quite expensive in time rather than materials. Now, the other thing you need to think about is, okay, is there a way I can speed this up and actually use these amazing skills that I have and monetize them in a different way? And so that could be designing knitting patterns, because once you've designed it, you can just sell it again and again and again, and that kind of, you don't have that great big time input of actually producing something. You could teach, and I definitely don't think I teach on YouTube. I think I inspire, I hope. And so that obviously sitting down and passing on your skills, that is definitely a very valid way of doing something. And you can do in person. I think in person's always better personally for teaching spinning or knitting, but you know, obviously a lot of people don't have access to that, so online, and there are lots of different online platforms. Then what about dyeing? So there are lots of indie dyers in the world, and that is definitely something that doesn't have quite the same time input as creating an end product. So you can put together kits so that your customer stops being the person who wants a finished garment, and your customer is a crafter, another crafter, and maybe you've got a little bit more in common with them than the person who can pay £250 for a knitted cardigan. I don't know. I'm guessing. Maybe you can pay £250 for a cardigan. I expect 3 years worth of wardrobe for £250. But then, you know, I'm an old hippie, so that's just the way it is. Oh gosh, and I'm also losing my voice, so let me just take a slurp of coffee. So I guess what I'm trying to say is horses for courses. Excuse me. Okay, I'm gone a bit cold, but never mind. So I would love to know, do you sell your work? Do you sell it as yarn? Do you sell finished items? And how do you cost it? Because I think it would be really great if we could get a discussion going in the comments and just help each other out. Now, this brings me on to kind of a rubbish question, okay? I don't sell my yarn. I used to sell my yarn very long time ago, back when Etsy was just starting out. I used to sell my yarn, and I looked back at some of my sales, and it's got to be 2008, something like that, 2007 maybe. And yeah, I charged £8 for 50 grams, and I sold it. I don't know whether that sounds expensive or cheap now, and I can't even remember at the time whether it felt expensive or cheap. But anyway, and I sold it, and I used to put it on our farmers market stall as well, and it used to sell. And when it was part of a big whole other picture, so not just the only thing I was doing, then it was less stressful because I wasn't having to make all my money from the kind of producing just the yarn. It was kind of something that went into the whole. So we were selling wild food and foraged mushrooms and the wool and honey and beeswax products, and you know, so there was a whole other thing that kind of meant that I wasn't just wholly reliant on that wool to sell on that market to cover the market stall costs and to cover the insurance and the transport and, you know, kind of my time and all those things. So it was kind of part of a whole. And I think there's an awful lot of smallholders, and that's the way they look at it, rather than going, that is the only thing I'm doing. It's part of their whole lifestyle. And maybe that is the difference between a lifestyle business and whatever a not lifestyle business is, that I don't know, because it's just gone out of my head because I'm middle-aged and that happens. So anyway, I'd love to know, are you selling your work? Is it successful? Do you sell on Etsy? Do you sell in person? Do you sell on a website? Now, you also probably will know, if you've been here for any time, that I sell my graphic designs for invitations on a print-on-demand site. And I would say that that is something I'm looking to change. I was really not getting on. I mean, I've done all right. It's brought enough money in for a little while, but I got really fed up with it. And a lot of that is to do with the fact that I'm just not doing my own illustrations anymore. It's a thankless, pointless exercise because fashion changes all the time in the invitation market. And so I'm constantly having to reinvent my style, which as an artist is not something I want to do. And this brings me to another point. This is a really long, rambly video. Anyway, another point. So, if you are going to sell your work and you're selling it on a website or on Etsy or at a market, I think it's very important to have a distinctive style that somebody looks at it and goes, that was made by X. And that is how you can build up a loyal following of customers who love your work. And it doesn't really matter what that style is. Find it, embrace it, share it with the world, because there will be people out there who love your style. It will completely resonate with them and they will be very happy to part with their cash for what you have produced. Now, on that note, I'm going to circle back to this friend that asked me about knitting an item. So it is actually one of my neighbours that asked me, and she is a lovely friend, and so I'm just going to gift it to her. Of course I am. And in some more videos, I probably will actually show you what I'm going to make for her. Okay, so moving on to the next part of the video. So the next part of the video is the jar of possibilities. If you were watching last time, you'll know that each one of these pieces of paper has a project written on it. And I'm at the point where I want to start planning a new project. So let's see what it's going to be. Now, I have put some non-knitting and spinning projects in here, and I did ask lots of people to give me feedback as to whether they were happy to see those other things on the channel, and you all said yes. So what's it going to be? If I really hate it, am I allowed not to do it? I don't know. Okay, so what is it? Make some lip balm. Okay, actually that's a really, really good thing. It is nearly the middle of June and I need to start thinking about making Christmas presents, believe it or not, because it does take me that long to get the Christmas present together. And the lip balm is, well, some of it's for me and then some of it is going to be Christmas presents for the female members of my family. And it's going to be made using our beeswax from our bees. Now, I was thinking I was going to go and do the bees today, but the weather is not great. It's quite windy, which is not a great time to actually open up bees. And also where we keep them is across the other side of the valley, and it's also quite a lot higher up than we are here. And so it's always about 2 degrees colder there. So I think probably today is not going to be the day when I do the bees. So there you go, lip balm. And I can't promise that'll be next week, but it is certainly going to be coming up quite quickly. Right, so next thing, very exciting. I'm monetarised, yay! So I shared probably last time that I'd reached a threshold, and then yesterday was the first day that YouTube paid me for the ads that are shown on my videos. They show the ads no matter what. I have no control over that. I have no control over what ads are shown, whether I agree with them or not. I can't do anything about that. However, I do get a percentage. So yesterday I earned the grand total of 14 pence. Yay! It's 14 pence more than I had yesterday. So I'll take it with grace and not worry too much about it. Okay, now I'm going to call it a day and hope that you're having a really fantastic time. But before we go completely, I will of course take you for a walk, and that is going to be a little bit later on today. So I will say goodbye from the house and I'll see you again in a little bit when we're out on our walk. So the wind's dropped enough that I think where I am is quite sheltered, so I am in fact going to inspect the bees, and I'll just turn you around and show you what's going on. If you don't like bees, just fast forward through this bit. Okay, let's have a look what's going on. Beekeeping is a very absorbing hobby, and if you're interested in becoming a beekeeper, then your local branch of the British Beekeeping Association will run taster days and courses that will help you learn everything you need to know. They also have a mentoring program so that you're never alone, and there's always an experienced beekeeper that you can ask questions with and help you on your learning process. My dad was a beekeeper, and Andrew and I have been keeping bees for over 10 years. There was a time when Andrew used to come up with me, but his disability has got to a point where he just finds coming up too difficult. He suffers with chronic pain and chronic fatigue, and it just is too much for him to come up and do the bees. But he still likes me to take some videos so he can see exactly what I'm doing and be involved in the whole process. So we have two hives. That looks like we've got a lot more hives, but they're actually all spares. And then that is a swarm box, which is just belt and braces. If I happen to miss a queen cell, then in theory we don't lose the whole colony, because they'll actually go there. And I mean, technically it's probably a little bit close to the hive, but it has worked in the past being there. So if it's worked in the past, it works again. And so we have one national and one Langstroth. And if you're a beekeeper, mostly in the States you use Langstroths, which is the sort of green hive over there, and a lot of people in the UK use nationals, and they are painted, as you can see, and we used to actually have these in our garden, but when we had a new puppy we decided that we'd actually move them up here, which is the out apiary, which we have very kind permission from some local landowners to use a corner of their paddock. And you'll notice I don't really cut down the plants. I cut them down near the entrance, but I leave the rest of the sort of the vegetation up round it, because I just think it shelters the hives a little bit. We are back in the woods, Lower Town, which is not so far from where we keep the bees. Oh, those bees, they really are not thriving this year. And I've probably already said this, Andrew and I decided that we will let God decide whether we're going to carry on with beekeeping. But they're not building up very well. I mean, they do have stores, so they should survive. But I don't think the queen in that Langstroth is doing her job very well. They're nowhere near big enough to split. They definitely don't look like they're about to swarm. And, you know, it's June, it's swarm season. So, oh well, that is just beekeeping for you, I guess. And if you are a beekeeper, you will be able to relate. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this week's video, and I have actually been filming some other stuff that I'm hoping I'll put out a little bit later in the week. So, until next time, have a wonderful, creative weekend. Bye for now.